Hi, I'm Andreas, a photographer from Germany, and for this making of video, I'm gonna take you deep into the forest. Keep watching to see if we actually went into the forest to make this picture. But let's start at the beginning. Every image starts as a concept that floats around in my head. The first thing I did to get a grip on that idea was to create a mood board with different forest scenarios. That way I could narrow down the look I wanted for the final image. At the same time, I had something to go on while explaining the concept to the model and to let her know what kind of pose I had in mind. Next, I had to decide how and where I wanted to make this image. So I went into the forest and took a look around. No power outlets, unpredictable weather, always changing ambient light. I quickly realized that we'd have better conditions and less things to worry about in the studio. And from a creative standpoint, I'd be able to build a forest floor exactly the way I wanted, with a lot of green and a lot of moss. I don't think I would have been able to find such a spot in a real forest. So, how to build a convincing forest floor? All I knew was that I wanted as much green as possible and that I'd have to put in a lot of detail and depth to make the scenario believable. I also knew that I wanted to avoid a garden look, which ruled out any grass or soil in the picture. For a little while I pondered the idea of using synthetic plants for this. But while researching, I came to realize what is supposed to look like a forest needs to come out of one. The only exception to this, the fern in the top part of the image and the branches reaching in from the sides. For these I used artificial plants since I was afraid of real ones not to be sturdy enough to make it through the shoot. Everything else I collected in the forest, which meant first and foremost a lot of moss. I was happy to find a lot of nice big chunks of moss to make the assembly process easier for myself. In addition to that, I also peeled some moss from tree trunks lying around. To enrich the scene and add detail, I also collected pine cones in different sizes, as well as dry leaves. By the way, I got all of that stuff just one day before the shoot, so that none of it could dry up sitting in a box. On the day of the shoot, I built the set in my home studio. First, I covered the floor with a blanket and a waterproof canvas to protect it from any moisture or dirt. To make it easier for the model, I placed a padded foam mat and a pillow above that. Without the pillow, the model's head would have bent over backwards in a very unflattering way. Above that, I spread a piece of black fabric to create a dark background in case of gaps in the forest floor. Also, I needed something for the moss to stick to, preventing it from sliding around all over the place. Then I placed all of the pieces of moss on that fabric, almost like a big forest puzzle. While doing that, I paid special attention to the edges in order to make them blend into each other in a natural way. In the end, I had covered an area of approximately 2 by 1.5 meters. Around it, I placed several moss-covered branches, which I had collected together with everything else in the woods. Finally, I scattered the pine cones and the dry leaves around the lying area to add detail. That also helped to close small gaps in the moss cover and to fill in the edges and corners of the viewable area. To achieve a deeper green and a wet shine on the leaves, I sprinkled the whole area with water. In order to keep it wet, we had to keep sprinkling all the time. After the floor was done, I turned my attention to the synthetic plants reaching in from the sides. To mount the fern, I taped some floral foam to light stands and stuck it in. That way I could easily adjust height and angle. Same thing for the artificial branches, which I also taped to light stands, just higher, approximately 1.5 meters above the ground. For the foliage to be visible in the image, I used things like reflector holders as boom arms. While arranging all the elements, I constantly reviewed their placement in the frame using live view to ensure both a balanced and appealing composition. At the same time, the color palette of the makeup was matched to the greens of the moss and then put on the model. The technical side of the shoot is easily explained. I shot using my Nikon D800, which I mounted to the crossbar of my background support system and lifted it up as high as possible. To be able to import the images directly into Lightroom, I connected the camera to my MacBook Pro using a very long USB cable of 10 meters. To ensure a stable connection with such a long cable, I put the TetherTools Tether Boost core controller in between. The settings on the camera: ISO 200, a focal length of 36mm, an aperture of f5.6 and a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. As a remote shutter release, I used the Pocket Wizard Flex system, which is normally used to fire off-camera flashes. In this case, however, I had the Flex TT5 transceiver on the camera connected with a special release cable and the mini TT1 transmitter in my hand as a remote control. My only light source was a studio flash from Elinchrom equipped with a standard reflector, which I bounced into the white ceiling for extremely soft light. I tilted the flash head a little to the side to achieve a subtle shadow on the left side of the model's body. To fire the flash, I used a Skyport transmitter, which was mounted on the Pocket Wizard on the camera. The fog machine I use is an inexpensive low-end model, which I augmented with a self-made cooling chamber. By cooling down the fog, it stays on the ground and creates some atmospheric vapor. During the actual shoot, the most important thing was to find a pose which emphasized the concept and looked both natural and appealing. Initially, I had planned to lay the model on her side in a slightly fetal position in keeping with the theme of the shoot. This pose also would have shown off her belly nicely. However, the model's face would have been too hidden from view and I was unsure as to how I should position her arms. While working on this problem together with the model, I was able to stand right out of frame, make adjustments and keep clicking the shutter on my remote all the time without having to go back to the MacBook for every exposure. This allowed for effortless communication and a very comfortable workflow. Every now and then, of course, I still reviewed the latest images on the screen to be able to decide what aspect of the pose I wanted to adjust next. In the end, I finally decided on a more classic, more open pose, with the lower body still to the side, but the upper body turned towards the camera and an arched back. This way, the model's face was nicely revealed and I could pose her arms around her body in a natural way. With the final pose found, I used the fog machine to add a little atmosphere to the image. Since I wasn't able to add fog from all sides at the same time, I decided to do those images after the fact and insert them in post. The model's presence wasn't necessary for this, as the vapor was supposed to appear only on the edges of the image anyway. The final image was then shot as a hidden nude. The model was able to keep on part of the underwear, as the thin ribbon could easily be removed during retouching. With this image, the conversion of the RAW file was not a big part of the overall post-processing. In Lightroom, I just recovered some of the detail in the shadows and boosted the greens of the moss. After that, I went straight to Photoshop to continue from there. While selecting the final image, I noticed that it had a perfect body posture, but lacked a great facial expression and placement of the right arm. Both of that was much better in an earlier image from the shoot, however, so the first thing I did in Photoshop was to replace part of the upper body with the better looking version. Then I removed the remaining pieces of the underwear. Next, I did some skin retouching and removed redness, little moles and tiny hairs, as well as dents and other surface-related blemishes. After that, I carefully used the liquify tool to optimize the body contours, followed by a light frequency separation to smooth the surface of the skin some more. Next, I turned my attention to the head and removed some flying hair and made tiny corrections to the eye makeup. In the following step, I dodged and burned the entire body to bring back some of the definition it had lost to the rather flat lighting. At the same time, I was able to add some contrast and glossiness to the hair to make it look richer. Subsequently, I filled in some gaps in the forest floor, especially around the head, where the moss slid around a bit, even with the fabric underneath. I also patched up the lower edge of the picture, which needed repair after straightening the image. After that, I inserted the ground fog from 6 different images in such a way that it seemed to creep into the frame from all sides naturally. With all structural changes done, I then applied several color and level adjustments to achieve a slightly desaturated and matte look. At the same time, I also increased the saturation of the hair color a little. Lastly, I added some bokeh effects and a vignette to give the image a slightly surreal feel. Here's a before and after, with all processing steps rolled into one. And here is the final image again. I hope you enjoyed this little insight into my work, and if you liked this video, I would certainly appreciate your feedback. So please leave me a comment or a thumbs up, drop me a line on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, or send me an email. Anyways, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye!